Thanks so much for being here today, Zoe, and congratulations on the book.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really cool to be part of this.
Of course. Well, you were patient zero of what came to be known as Gamergate. There wasn't a precedent, let alone a terminology to really describe what was happening to you. How did you realize and process what was going on in real time?
So I like to, when people ask me where I'm from, I like to say I'm from the internet, because I grew up pretty rurally in upstate New York in a very small village. So really, when I had a dial-up modem and like had to deal with super slow speeds, it was like the only way for me to really find community and meet other people and talk to other people outside of like this tiny isolated town I was part of. So I had seen similar-ish sort of mechanisms of online abuse happen to other people in the past. So I was able to figure out pretty much exactly where to watch what was going to happen next. And women in games had been getting harassed and targeted like well before me, and it was like kind of a known thing that too many of us had to deal with. Yeah. So I kind of just, it was unfortunately familiar in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one point that you have been really great at making is pushing back against so many people who say to women, like, why don't you just log off? Like, why are you online so much? Can you like talk about the extent to which like this extends into real life and why, you know, like real life versus virtual life, as if there is really a divide, and really how important that is to realize also?
Right. I mean, so in my casework with Crash Override, it became really apparent that so many cases of online abuse started offline. And you know, my Gamergate started with domestic violence in my case, and similarly, like my dad doesn't. He types with 2 fingers. He doesn't. You know, anytime I go home and visit him, he's like, "How do I take my phone off mute?" Does not do anything like that. But that doesn't like stop him from getting calls at like 3 in the morning from neo-Nazis, like yelling at him. But I mean, at least he's like, you know what? If someone calls up and they use my full name, I know they're either one of those Gamergaters or a bill collector, and I hang up.
That's amazing.
My dad's great.
Your dad sounds amazing. I guess, you know, like it was really hard to mitigate like what's happening and, you know, like what you can recover, because before you, there was really no roadmap for dealing with for dealing with this kind of stuff. There's a lot of layers to the crisis. There's a safety issue, there's a reputation issue, career issues, personal life. And like, to me, that sounds really debilitating. How did you figure out how to triage a lot of those things?
Kind of by making a lot of mistakes, honestly. You know, my accounts got hacked and my info got spread using my own accounts because I knew logically that I should have better passwords than like a 7-word joke phrase. But I'm like, I'm an independent game developer. Who's even going to try and bother, right? So I kind of learned all of the points of failure by screwing up, and then figuring out what I could have done, and then worked backwards from there. And you know, Gamergate had started with me, but spread out to so many people. And online abuse affects people that have nothing to do with video games at all. And I just, you know, I'm a game designer for a reason. Like game design is essentially systems creation, and so I can see when I notice systems, and that's sort of the way I think. So it's like, oh, all of these things work in this specific way. There's basically this engine of abuse that, like, once you go into it, like, these certain things will happen. There's only really one playbook. So, you know, via what happened to me and relating to other people that had been through similar things, it's like, oh, these are the points of failure. Yeah. This is where the problems are, and how can we work backwards from that to figure out how to either head it off at the pass or mitigate the damage once it's already being done.
Yeah, I mean, one huge point of failure, I think, is that law enforcement doesn't really have a protocol to effectively handle these situations. You would think in like 2017, with everything that is going on, that that's something that we would have a handle on, but not really. So I want to talk about the legal process, which you've done like a fantastic job highlighting. One of the challenges that you identified is that figuring out how to take on essentially like faceless individuals that are perpetrating attacks without giving them, like, you know, a virtual microphone, essentially. Like, what's your strategy for that?
It really depends on what kind of the threat model is, right? Especially as it pertains to law enforcement. I'm not optimistic that going after individual abusers is kind of the way that's going to fix much. But if we were able to legislate and work with the criminal justice system to hold private corporations accountable for things like third-party information brokers that can have your home address, phone number, personal information, link all of that to all of your family members, and have this, they buy and sell this data without your consent, without your knowledge, and they make it very difficult to opt out. And those sorts of sites are why people had my home address and were texting me pictures of the apartment that I wasn't able to go back to for so long. That while they were talking about doing all sorts of nasty things to my residents and looking for me. I would like to see more legislation of those companies that are sort of profiting off of this, because right now that's completely unlegislated. And I feel like people don't usually think about data and privacy because you don't feel data. But the Equifax data breach that just happened, I feel like has maybe opened some eyes in terms of getting people to think, oh, there are a lot of privacy issues here, and I didn't know that this stuff could just be out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, because what has happened with so much technology is that the risk gets shifted back onto the consumers as opposed to the company all the time, and that would be, to me at least, that seems like a worthwhile thing to look into. Another thing that I want to talk about really is how this has really affected you, because I think that you've been really a model for so many of us who have dealt with online harassment issues, and you were really strong, you were really determined, and but I want to know, how has this affected your relationship with the internet? Is this, what has changed? What are ways that you appreciated more, appreciated less, and how much more do you engage there?
I can't imagine a life, living my life completely offline anymore. I grew up alongside the internet. It's always been a part of me. I have friends that actually on this book tour that I've been friends with online through IRC rooms for over a decade that I've never met face to face, that have been with me through a lot of hard stuff, that I'm suddenly actually meeting for the first time in person. And that sense of community is still so amazing. I just made a friend, I made a friend 10 months ago via playing games online anonymously, so no idea. I accidentally let it slip that I was a game developer, and he's like, oh, anything I would have heard of? I'm like, uh-oh, I don't know who, are you you're a 23-year-old kid, I don't know, you're in the demographic of people that may have sent me threats. So I'm just like, you'd be able to figure out who I was, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really want to go into it. And he's like, oh, that's fine. And we just ended up having a real friendship over the next 10 months, and I just met him in person, and he's just the nicest person still, and it was not weird. And it's I love that, despite all of the bad and despite all the trouble, the internet is still a place where I find community. It's still a place where I meet, even just in my industry, that's such a big and vital support network, and so good for mobilizing people to do good things, supporting marginalized voices that wouldn't otherwise have a platform, for supporting cool, weirdo artists like me. I feel like that is so valuable that it makes me want to fight harder, so that the only people online aren't the ones willing to yell the loudest and be the most noxious.
Yeah. And speaking of helping, Crash Override, the network that you co-founded to support other victims of online abuse, has been a tremendous resource. So you galvanize experts in tech, legal, media, security matters. The site provides information, everything on how to find and close online accounts, how to communicate with employers if you're a victim of online attacks like Gamergate. Why was this so important to you to really get involved in the prevention and support side?
I think part of it's just I'm a mechanic's daughter. I'm so used to if there is a thing that I want that doesn't exist, I just do it. And while Gamergate was happening, since it was spreading out from me to other people so quickly, and I watched this unfold in real time because I was just documenting it. I got really good at trying to stay one step ahead and go and be like, oh, the mob's look, the eye of Sauron is turning on you. Let's don't make all the same mistakes I did. This is how to do all this, right? And I've just been doing that naturally. And after a while, it's okay, we've gotten pretty good at this. This seems to be more effective than trying to report to tech or dealing with law enforcement at all. maybe we can make this more grassroots. And I'm still an engineer at heart, so if it's like I find myself having the same conversation over and over, it's like, how can I automate this though? So making guides and resources, especially, just trying, I feel like it's kind of a Soylent Green thing where the internet is just people. So it's like if we can get all of that information into everybody's hands, we can use that same power of networking that people who want to hurt people can use to summon mobs and destroy other people to do the opposite. If everybody is on board, if we get everybody educated, and if we really impress upon people that you're part of something bigger, that the internet is this global community that's only growing, and feel like you have a place in it and a duty to look out for the people in your community and build that resilience and those connections, because nobody's going to come do it for us. Nobody's going to come and save us. We have to take care of each other. And that sounds kind of sad, but the nice thing about that is we don't have to wait. We can do that now for each other, and that's so important.
That's amazing. How do you respond to those critics that say that limiting what people can say online infringes on their right to free speech?
I would say that we've already had this conversation back in the early 90s. We had it with spam. Spam, it's those messages advertising all kinds of weird garbled things that go directly. You don't even need to look at them. And that's way more free, that's like more protected speech just from a legal standpoint than a death threat is. So what it came down to, and I think a really useful argument for people to kind of maybe consider, is ultimately, like, it was back and forth, like, I should be allowed to advertise my product however I want, however many times I want, that's my free speech. And people had to go, look, this is impeding the intended use of this platform's ability to function. This is making it worse for everybody. It's a quality issue. It's breaking this thing that we made and making it unusable for other people. And now anti-spam work is like $1 million industry. I don't know why we can't still make these quality arguments, because it's like, did you design a platform where these mobs can be raised to target marginalized people? Like, is that your intended use case? If not, maybe you have a problem that should be addressed. Because at the end of the day, it's your platform, it's your product, and if it's your house, it's your rules.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. What have you seen that's been able to convince these very bottom line driven companies to pay attention to this? And are policies changing, and how can we, everybody in this room, help to do that?
So I think the biggest thing is that policies kind of are changing. There's a lot of lip service being paid, because the difficulty in tech with these giant corporations is, even if you have good people working within them that really want to enforce change and really do the work, if you go high up enough in the chain, sometimes there's someone with kind of a weirder opinion about things, because it's like, it would be faulty to assume that people creating the infrastructure from the internet, that the internet runs on it, are somehow also immune to being a part of the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Someone knows.
Somebody gets it.
And that's a major issue. So I think getting people informed about, even though I've been to million anti-harassment summits and stuff like that, just because they're talking to people doesn't mean they're listening. Just because they have a terms of service agreement doesn't mean they're actually going to enforce it. Because almost every major platform has a terms of service saying we do not support hate speech or harassment, but actually getting them to move on it is another story entirely.
Yeah. Who do you think are, we should identify as some of the most vulnerable groups online?
Basically, the furthest that you get from the 1950s sitcom dad look, every step from that is a new, we have to have an intersectional approach to it, right? Because it's a woman might get one thing, a trans woman might have to deal with anti-transness and misogyny and transmisogyny, so it's those two things and then an additional third thing. Yeah. And then for every axis of marginalization, not only is there a community online who will recreationally abuse you, there's the severity and types of attack change based on who you are, which is sad, because it's I feel like a lot of people love the internet because it's theoretically, it should just not matter what you look like. This stuff should not come into play. It should be able to just be minds connecting. But, the internet's not some magical alternate reality where nothing carries over and biases are checked at the door. Yeah. And I think that's really crucial for people to understand with online abuse. It's all of the nasty stuff that exists offline it comes with you like a toilet paper stuck on your shoe when you're leaving the bathroom.
That image will forever be burned in my mind now. One thing that I have been really struck by in listening to you speak and reading interviews that you've done is how you've kind of gotten to a place where you can empathize for the people who are, like, all of the people that are misbehaving online. I'm still at the point where all I want to do is break the computer. But, you know, and you know, I know that you're not a restorative justice expert and you're not claiming to be, but you know, like, one, I think that it's really commendable that you are looking at how we can reach people and really how we can all heal from this, because you're right, a lot of the misogyny offline is what is coming into place. What do you think is a solution there, or a place that we can all move forward to?
I think it's maybe we're in like sort of this weird period with the information age and with the internet like connecting us, where we haven't quite adapted to think of people on the other end as people. I think there's a failure of empathy in a lot of ways. And I think there's also a big reaction to, for the first time, a lot of people who would never ever talk to each other are now aware of and interacting and maybe don't know how to treat each other. I don't know that we are terribly great at communicating how to talk to and treat each other online, for better or worse. And you know, I was a teenage jerk too when I was younger. Like I was a gigantic troll when I was a depressed, queer, geographically isolated kid. That, you know, having a computer and being able to affect someone with just my words felt like power, and that's kind of a big thing that I think it comes down to for a lot of people who participate in this, is they don't have this feeling of power, and there's usually this like sense of community that's gained with the people that they are trying to impress by, you know, attacking marginalized people. Like there's a very performative element to it, and you know, not to excuse any of that behavior, I think understanding it is key to figuring out how can we work backwards and design solutions that maybe treat each other as less disposable while still centering the needs and prioritizing the people that are actually being harmed. You know, and I think that's like one of the only ways we can go forward, outside of people who are just bad faith actors no matter what, which is a totally separate thing.
Yeah. Well, Zoe, thank you so much for all of your work.
Thank you.
The internet doesn't deserve you, but we appreciate you. It's true. And thanks so much for joining us today. This was fantastic.
Thanks for having me.